So what I want to jump into tonight, and we're probably not going to get as far as I want to, but I think we're also going to be carrying this into the new year with Bible studies. Because the more I study David and being a man after God's own heart, the more cool things I see in it. Just super brief, we started talking about what it means to be a man after God's own heart. Because there's only one person that God said that about. And he went looking for him. There's another passage, Pastor Chip and I were talking about this because he mentioned it, not this Sunday, but last Sunday, how there's a verse where God is talking and he says, I found David, a man after my own heart. So that means God's looking. God's looking to find somebody like a David. God's looking to find a man after his own heart. And a man after God's heart is not perfection. A man after God's own heart is not perfection. So it's not something unattainable. It's not like, well, I can't be that good, or I can't do that, or I can't do that. Because, and we'll see, we probably won't get to it tonight, so it'll probably end up being maybe in January. But we'll see. The two things that I probably want to hit tonight is covenant and integrity. Because, last time we got to the point where David had his victory over Goliath, and his life in God set him up for victory over Goliath. He was a nobody. He was the youngest of 8. And in fact, to the point where his dad didn't even count him when Samuel came to visit and said, bring all your sons. And he lined up 7 of his sons, and God tells Samuel, this isn't the right one. None of these are the right one. And he says, do you have any others? And Jesse has to think for a minute. And he goes, oh yeah, there's the youngest one, but he's out with the sheep. So he was nobody out in the middle of nowhere doing a nothing job, but he was doing it with a good attitude. And he was ministering to God. He was developing he was taking ownership of his covenant. Even out there in the middle of a pasture with the sheep poop and the wolves and the lions and the bears, oh my. And yet he was doing it with a good attitude. He was honoring God by honoring his dad. And that honor, that covenant position that David found himself in, that he took ownership of, brought him to the place where now he was the one that took out Goliath. Because he was so firm, he was so completely established in his covenant that when he saw Goliath, he didn't think, oh, this guy's almost 10 feet tall. He thought, no, this guy is dissing my God that I have a covenant with. And he went and took care of business and took out Goliath. And in the process, he blessed and benefited the entire rest of the nation of Israel. And Saul he's looking at David, and at first, he's like, who is this guy? I want him around. I want him as a part of my staff, But we're going to see where that sours. That starts to turn. And I want to read a real quick section.
David?
Yeah?
What did you say it was?
Who?
The sour thing?
Oh, his relationship with Saul is fixing to sour in a hurry.
What does that mean?
That means it's getting ready to get bad.
Oh.
David didn't do anything wrong, but this is what happens when fear and insecurity and jealousy take over. Because Saul knew that he wasn't going to get to be king forever because he'd screwed up. I think one of the first things we talked about back in one of the very, 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 very beginning sessions was God gave Saul a job to do. Mm-hmm. And he only did it halfway. Yeah. He was supposed to kill all the Amalekites. He was supposed to kill the king. He was supposed to kill every... And I know this sounds brutal, but when you realize who the Amalekites were, they needed to go bye-bye.
They're really bad.
They needed to go bye-bye. They were sacrificing their children. They had a god, and the god stood over a fire, and the statue had its hands out like this, and they would take their babies and they would lay the baby across the arms or across the palms of the god, and if it was accepted, the fire would literally cook the kid. So these people needed to go bye-bye. They were not not good people at all. But Saul only does it halfway. He goes and he captures the king, doesn't kill him, and he saves all the animals. And Samuel comes up to him and goes, What the heck, man? This is not what you were told to do. And instead of taking ownership of his mistake, he starts passing the buck. Well, the people wanted to save this, and the people wanted to hold on to this, because we thought it would be a good idea if we saved these sheep and these oxen over here for a sacrifice. And Samuel goes, dude, no. You did not do what God told you to do. And not only that, now you're not even taking responsibility for it. So God's removed you from being king. And then he throws a fit. And he grabs hold of Samuel. And in the process, he grabs hold of his robe and he tears his robe. And Samuel looks at him and goes, okay, just like you tore my robe, God's going to tear the kingdom out of your hand. So now he's not in a good headspace. He knows that he screwed up and he knows there's no way back for him, but he's still king right now. So David goes and he's been anointed, but it's been in secret. Because Samuel told God, he says, listen, if Saul hears that I've anointed somebody else, he's going to come after the person I anointed, and he's going to come after me for anointing him. So they just lay low for a while. David's been anointed. He's still taking care of the sheep. He's anointed to be the leader of the entire nation, and he's still out with the sheep poop. He's still taking care of the sheep because he's humble. And that's another quality of a man after God's own heart, is humility. David could have gloated to all of his older brothers and said, it's good to be me. It's good to be me. You guys are going to be serving me. But he didn't do that. He was humble. And a man of God is humble. A man of God will be the one to be the seeming nobody in the middle of nowhere doing a nothing job with a good attitude. A man of God will develop his own personal relationship. In David's case, it was the covenant, because there was no Jesus yet. There was no opportunity for a personal relationship. And yet David had a personal relationship with God. He had something that Moses didn't. Moses got the closest to it because he'd go up on the mountain and he'd visit with God. But David, as a nobody, developed a relationship with God when nobody else even knew what that looked like. He's out there singing songs to God. He's out there worshiping God. Doesn't care if anybody hears it. Doesn't care. He's just out there worshiping God.
I don't think anybody does.
There he is.
What's up?
Come on, Milwaukee.
Sit on the band chair. Or that blue one.
No, he's gonna hibernate over there on the couch. So
Still here.
Yeah, there you go.
So now David has had his victory, and again, he's not gloating about it. But here's what happens. So David has taken, this day the Lord will deliver you in my hands, and so on and so forth. And David ran. Pastor Chip was talking about this, how to enthusiastically kill a giant. David didn't wait for Goliath to get to him. He started running at Goliath. And so David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it, struck the Philistine in his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead. So it was a headshot. He sniped him. And he fell face down on the ground. David prevailed, killed the Philistine. There was no sword in David's hand, so he took Goliath's own weapon. How humiliating is that? He took the dude's own weapon and cut his head off with it.
Probably twice the size.
Yeah, it was.
Definitely.
So there's a great victory. So now, when Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the entire army, "Whose kid is this?" And Abner said, "I have no clue, O king." And the king said, "Well, go find out who he is." So when David came back after killing Goliath, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. Dude's still holding on. Dude's still holding on to a bloody, sweaty trophy. He's got this dude's head still in his hand.
He said, "This is my name."
And Saul goes, "Whose son are you?" And I think it's interesting because David had been working for Saul. And Saul still didn't recognize it. Saul still didn't recognize it. So David didn't come up to him and go, "Dude, don't you know me? I've only been playing for you for like however long. I've only been like your armor bearer." He didn't have an attitude. He was still humble. And it just skipped down on me. It's funny. So, it starts out in chapter 18. It says, "Now it came about when he finished speaking to Saul that," and this is another thing, and we'll tie these two things together, but it came about that the soul of Jonathan, now Jonathan is Saul's son. He's technically next in line for the throne. But it says that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as though it was a part of himself. And Saul took him that day, and David never went back to his dad's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan took his robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. And this is how you made a covenant. This is how two people would cut a covenant. There would be blood involved. Oftentimes, they'd take their knife and they'd make a cut on their wrist, or they'd make a cut on the palm of their hand, and they would grab hands. I don't know if you've ever seen this in a Western. The Indian tribes would do this too. They would make a blood covenant, and they would each make a cut, and they would grab hands. And even though technically the blood's not going back and forth, symbolically they're saying, now we're of one blood. So Jonathan and David are doing this. And another part of the covenant was, it says Jonathan took his robe off. Your robe is your authority and your status. So David still had a shepherd's robe on. He still had a low status robe on. Everybody saw his shepherd's garment. They knew exactly what he did. They knew exactly where he was on the social ladder. Jonathan had a high status robe. When Jonathan would walk around, even if you were looking at him from behind and couldn't see his face and recognize him as Jonathan, you saw that robe, you went, "Oh, that's a member of the king's family." So the robe was very important. So what does Jonathan do? He takes off his authority, he takes off his status, and he puts it on David. Now he's raised David to his status. But David at the same time has taken off his shepherd's coat and given it to Jonathan. That's the way the covenant worked. So Jonathan took on a servant, David took on royalty. And it says that he took off his belt. So your belt's where your money bag is. So when you're cutting covenant, and he took off his belt and gave it to David, he took off his finances, he took off his riches and gave it to David. Well, David doesn't have anything but a shepherd's bag, but that shepherd's bag still has 4 stones in it because Goliath had 4 brothers. So they're trading. They're trading power. They're trading authority. They're trading wealth. When a covenant, especially in the Old Testament, was the strongest, most unbreakable bond between two people. A lot of perverted things have been said about this. It said that Jonathan and David were lovers and all this. I mean, stupid people making stupid comments, trying to justify a lifestyle. That's not what it means. When two people would cut covenant, when two guys would cut covenant, one of the things they said was, they would say, "This is my body. This is my blood." Does that sound familiar? Fast forward about 1,600 years, and Jesus does that with his disciples in the upper room before his crucifixion. So David's a man of the covenant. He's got a covenant with God, and he understands the importance of that. And now he's literally cutting a covenant with the king's son. And so there's an exchange of weapons, power. Basically, it's trading lives. It's what you're doing. I'm saying, if I'm cutting covenant with Casey, I'm saying, my life is your life, and your life is my life. Anybody comes against you, it's the same thing as coming against me. I'm going to kick their butt. I'm going to come to your aid because we're in covenant. Now, the same thing happens. Somebody comes up and starts talking smack to me. I can expect you to drop what you're doing and come up and go, really? You sure you want to do this today? Is this the hill you want to die on? Because you're coming against somebody that I'm in covenant with. There is nothing stronger. There is nothing stronger. And we'll see that later on down the road. But remember the exchange. Remember the blood. For there to be a covenant, words have to be spoken and blood has to be shed. Well, with two guys, for example, that Casey would take, and he'd take his knife and he'd cut himself in either the hand or on the side of the wrist or whatever. And I would do the same, and we'd grab over that wound. So now we're of one blood. That's important later on. So David's a man of the covenant. But what happens is, now David's getting more notoriety.
Can a covenant be broken?
At the life of the person breaking the covenant. In fact, one of the phrases that's very common in making a covenant is, like when they would use animals, you've got the animal cut in half, literally in half, boom, boom. And one of the phrases that's said when you cut a covenant is, may God do to me what I've done to this animal if I break the covenant. May God do to you what we've done to this animal if you break the covenant. And it's not just you. It's you, your kids, your kids' kids, your kids' kids, kids' kids' kids, all the way down. It's an eternal thing. That's why when God made a covenant with Abraham, it was forever. So David's a man of the covenant. That's part of being a man of honor. He's never, ever, ever going to break this.
People who were with him,
Oh,
to
shut
real
up.
Judah.
No, I'm not trying to read it out loud.
You are trying to read it out loud.
I'm going to read it this way because it's easier.
But that one won't speak to you.
No.
It's not directly. That's going to auto read to the Bible. Then going back and he's at the end.
So Saul actually puts David over a lot of the men. And when they came back to town, I'm paraphrasing for the sake of time. When they came back to town, everybody turns out. It's a big celebration. And all the women are singing. And they strike up this song. It says, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s. And as soon as Saul heard that, he got all kinds of mad and freaked out. Because he's like, what? They're giving more glory. They're ascribing more glory to David than they are to me. And he says, what else is there left to give him but my kingdom? And the very next verse it says, and Saul distrusted and suspected David from that day forward. So here Saul is insecure. And David's getting honor because he genuinely saved Israel. But now Saul is starting to sour on the whole thing. This is where I want to pick up. It says that Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on. This is the beginning of David literally having to run for his life from the very person, the very man that he helped, and the very person he swore to serve. And as a man of God, how does that translate to today? Has anybody ever been falsely accused of something? You've had somebody blame you for something, suspect you of something when you were completely innocent. And you know how that feels. And you know the first thing you want to do is you want to ball up and you want to defend yourself, or you want to take out the person making the accusation. Well, here's what a man after God's own heart does. David doesn't do any of that. This begins a process. Saul tries over a dozen times to assassinate David. Think about that. Saul tries a dozen times to have David killed, or to do it himself. This goes on and on and on, time after time. Saul tries to kill David over a dozen times. Every single time, David responds with honor. Every single time, David responds with reverence. He still calls, time after time after time. Other people said, hey, listen, let's go take Saul out. He says, no, I'm not going to touch God's anointed. Even though Saul was bat guano crazy and trying to kill him, he still honored, because God had anointed Saul to be king. And David would not break that honor. And that's what a man of God does. Even though he was wrongly accused, even though he was being hunted down, just a few of the times. First time out, David's literally ministering to Saul. He's playing music and he's ministering to Saul, and Saul picks up a spear and chucks it across the room at him. Now he misses him. David ducks. He doesn't fight back. He just leaves. Then Saul decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to put him in such a position that I'll just let the Philistines do the job. Well, David rises to the occasion and he kills the Philistines. Saul goes, okay, I'll make him my son-in-law. I'll give him an impossible task, because David wasn't rich and you were supposed to basically buy your wife. Okay? So you would have what was called a dowry, and you would show up with a chest like this, and it might have clothing in it. It would probably have some gold in it. It might have jugs of wine in it. You're basically going to the girl's dad that you wanted to marry. Sir, I want to buy your daughter. And David's like, I can't do anything. So Saul thinks, I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. And so he says this. Check this out. He said, you can marry my daughter. The only dowry I want is 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but the foreskin is attached to a very, very sensitive part of the male anatomy. I'll leave that to your imagination. So what does David do? He gets a group of guys together. He doesn't get 100 of them. He gets 200 of them and puts them in a bag and takes them back to the king. He walks back into the throne room with a bag of male parts and plops them down in front of the throne and goes, so we decided to go a little overboard. There's 200 of them there. I'll take your daughter now. And so he marries the king's daughter. But here's the thing. Saul thought he was going to let the Philistines take care of it, because there's no way David's going to survive that. But God's with David because he's a man of honor. So then again, he ordered his son. Now remember, he's made a covenant with Jonathan. He ordered his son to assassinate him. Jonathan refuses. He throws a spear at his own son because he won't go along with the plan. Then he hires more assassins. This time David's wife, who is Saul's daughter, hides him, lets him out of the window at night, takes an idol, puts it in the bed, puts a sheep or a goat's hair skin on top of it so it looks like his head, covers him up with blankets. The assassins show up to take him. She says, he's sick. They go, okay, well, we'll just grab the bed and all. They grab the bed and all. They take it back to Saul. And Saul peels back the blankets to kill David. And it's a statue with goat hair on it. Now he's really mad. Because now his own daughter won't even go in on it with him. This one is one of my favorite ones. So he sends assassins again. And David is with some priests and prophets hiding out. And the assassins go, they get in the presence of God, they start prophesying, they can't kill him. They start prophesying. So Saul goes, okay, fine, I'll send another group of assassins. They get in the presence of God, they can't kill him. So Saul finally goes, all right, fine. If you want anything done, you got to do it yourself. So now Saul goes to kill him. Saul gets in the presence of God. He lays on his face for a day and a night and prophesies. He can't kill him. You would think Saul would get the idea by this time, but no.
What is it like before today?
That was attempt 6, 7, and 8. Attempt 9. Saul takes out an entire group of priests and a village for harboring David. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Each time David is handling this with honor. There's a time where David's hiding in a cave. As luck would have it, Saul goes to that same cave. He's chasing David. He stops in the mouth of that same cave to take a pee. Literally, it says he stopped to relieve himself. Well, we all know what that means. So Saul's standing at the mouth of the cave, taking a pee. David's hiding in the back of the cave. So he sneaks up behind Saul. Now, he could have taken him out right there. But what does he do? He takes out his knife. He cuts a little strip of Saul's robe off and holds on to it. Saul leaves. He gets a good distance away. David goes, and he holds up Saul's robe. He says, I don't want to do you harm. Why are you chasing me? I've done nothing wrong. Saul sees that he's holding on to his robe. Now he's embarrassed. He says, I screwed up. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm done. We're going to go. So he and all of his men leave. Then he comes back and he does it again and again. And then one night, Saul is chasing David. He's asleep at night in the camp.
Didn't they show this in the movie?
David sneaks down with one of his other men to the mid. They sneak into the middle of the camp. They slept to protect the king. So the king sleeps in the middle, and then he's got guards around him, and then those guys are men around them, and then men around them, and then men around them, and then men. However many guys are there, they're doing this in concentric circles, right? So David has stuck through all of these concentric circles of guys. And he's now standing over the king. And the guy that's with him goes, listen, one shot. I can take his own spear that's stuck in the ground right there. I can take his own spear, drive it right through his temple. We're done. We're out of here. You don't have to worry about it anymore. He says, no, I will not touch God's anointed. Now, this is the guy that so far has spent a dozen tries trying to kill him for no reason. He says, no, I'm not going to do it. So he takes Saul's spear, he takes his canteen, and they sneak out. The next day, they're on one side, David's on the other side. He says, hey, he holds up the spear and the jug.
Something?
Huh?
You missing something?
Yeah. Guys, I really don't want to pursue this. Please. I'm trying to honor you. Saul gets embarrassed again. He says, I've sinned. So on and so forth. But here's the thing.
Was that number 12?
What you do, how you respond when you are unfairly accused is more important than exploits that you do for God. David's response to Saul, his honor, his refusal to seek his own vengeance, the way he treated God's anointed, the honor that he still gave to this guy who's now clearly crazy and clearly coming after him with everything. I mean, 3,000 men this time, 2,000 men this time, individual assassins, all these different things. And David still won't fight back because he's honoring the covenant. He's honoring the fact that God has anointed Saul. So, how you handle, how you respond when you're being unfairly accused is more important to God than exploits that you do for God. So you think about that. I just tell you one time in particular. This was back when I was in high school, and I worked at a restaurant. I worked at a Pizza Hut. This was back when Pizza Hut was sit down. It wasn't delivery only. Like you could literally go in as a waiter. I'd come to your table, take your order. You know, they'd make the pizza, so on and so forth, right? So I worked at Pizza Hut, and we were at an event. In the school was at an event, so we ate at Pizza Hut, and a whole table of guys got up and left without paying. I went back in, I paid their tab. I still got in trouble as an employee. Unfair, but accepting that and operating with honor actually got me a better position at a different company. That's just one thing in particular. The corporate said, well, but you were on the bus. Yeah, but I was the one that came back in and I covered their tab. I paid for their meal so that it wasn't a dine and dash. Yeah, but you were still on the bus. I could have raised all kinds of righteous hell, so to speak, about that. I could have stood up for my rights. I could have taken it to corporate. I could have appealed it. I could have made a big stink. I could have got them in trouble because I knew every single one of the people that was at that table that left without pay. I could have gotten every single one of them in trouble, but I didn't. That's not, oh my gosh, Dave, you're so great. I'm just saying there comes a time when you either go with what God says or you try to defend yourself. And if you go with what God says, God looks at that and there's something even better for you down the road. There's something even better. There's even more promotion. There's even more blessing. There's even more benefit because you conducted yourself with honor. Because that's what a man after God's own heart is. So, like I said, in spite of all this that's going on, David is still always taking the high road. But in the middle of this, now David's being chased, and this is another quality of a man of God. There is a town called Keilah, and the Philistines are raiding Keilah. Keilah is getting its butt kicked. David's hiding nearby with his men, and he goes, all right, we're going to go rescue Keilah. And his men are like, dude, are you nuts? You want us to go out in the open? You want us to expose ourselves where the people that are hunting us can easily see where we're at? And he inquires of God. God says, yeah, go help him out. So he takes his men. They go take out the Philistines that are raiding. They clean up the town. It's kind of like, have you guys ever seen the movie The Magnificent Seven? The Western Magnificent Seven. It's this little bitty town, can't fight back, and all these fugitives, these gunslingers, they go and they rescue the town at their own peril. And so you could say a bonus feature of being a man of God is somebody who will step up to help those who can't help themselves, even if it puts him at risk. Even if it puts him at risk. David says, I can't stand, I can't sit by, I can't stay hidden in this cave. Yeah, Saul can't find me, but I can't stay hidden in this cave and watch innocent people suffer, watch an innocent town get raided, watch innocent people get killed or dragged off into captivity, I can't stand here as a man of God and watch that happen and do nothing about it. Even if it means exposing myself to the people that are hunting me. Even if it means putting myself in harm's way. And so David and his men go and do that. So the last thing I want to talk about is, and it goes with honor. The last thing I want to touch on for tonight. And it goes with honor, and that is, as we saw, David's a man of the covenant. Not only his covenant with God, he makes 3 separate covenants with Jonathan. Like one wasn't enough. So there's that first one that we read about. Well, then, David's being hunted by Saul. Jonathan's helping him escape. And because at first Jonathan doesn't want to believe that his dad will not see reason. And so they devise a test. And David doesn't show up for a specific set of feasts. And he says, if Saul notices and asks, you tell him that David begged to go out of town to spend these feasts with his family. And if he's hot about that, then I know he's trying to kill me. If he's okay with that, then okay, fine. Maybe there's hope for this relationship. So Jonathan does that. Saul flies into a rage, accuses Jonathan of hiding him, all of these different things. So Jonathan goes back to David and goes, I'm so sorry, dude. You need to take off for your own safety. But at that same point, they go, now, here's another, we're making another covenant. Swear by God that I'll look after your descendants, you look after my descendants. And we're going to see later on how important that is. So they make another covenant. And then shortly before Jonathan dies, they make a third covenant. Now remember what we talked about with especially with the cutting and the bleeding. That wasn't just a little paper cut. It was substantial. And they would see to it, they would take ashes from the fire and rub that into that cut as it was healing, so that there would always be a scar there to remind them of their covenant. Now, you fast forward into the book of 2 Samuel, after David becomes king, and one day he asks, now keep in mind, Saul's dead, Jonathan's dead, they died in battle, David's now king, there was sort of a civil war, a lot of Saul's family is dead, a lot of Jonathan's brothers and so on and so forth are dead, but one day, and you have to imagine this. It doesn't say that he looked down at his hand and saw the scar, but David asked the question. He said, is there nobody left of the house of Jonathan that I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake? And you have to know, one day David's sitting on his throne and he's talking, he's kind of doing his thing, and all of a sudden he looks over and that scar catches his eye. And he's looking at that scar, and that scar is reminding him of his beyond best friend in the world, the man that he's cut covenant with, and he sees that and he's thinking, I swore to this guy I'd take care of his descendants. So he starts asking the people in his court, isn't there somebody left? Isn't there somebody left? I'm looking at this scar and it's staring me in the face, reminding me that I made a blood covenant with a guy that I'd take care of his family. Isn't there anybody left that I can fulfill this covenant with? And somebody goes, well, I heard about this one person. His name is Mephibosheth. And he is a cripple. And he lives in this really skanky town called Lodabar. And he's a nothing. He's a nobody. But technically, yeah, he's Jonathan's relative. And David's like, thank God. Go find him. Bring him here. And so they go to like I said, Lodabar it's a skanky one-horse town. It's like a slum. And the reason that Mephibosheth is crippled is because back during the Civil War, everybody thought they were going to die by David. So his nurse, his nanny, grabs him and they start to run off and she drops him and he breaks both of his ankles. And so he can't walk right from that day on. And so David's men show up to get this guy Mephibosheth, and he's thinking, oh, great. Well, I'm screwed now. David's guys have finally found me. They're going to parade me through the city as the last remaining descendant of Saul and David, and it's going to be off with my head. But I can't run. I can't run. I can't move very fast. So screw it. I guess I'll go with him. So he goes. David literally hugs the man and says, what are you doing living in that skanky one-horse town? You are a relative of the man I cut covenant with. From here on out, dude, you've got a room at the palace. From here on out, you'll sit at my table. From here on out, if I'm eating prime rib, you're eating prime rib. If I'm eating filet mignon, you're eating filet mignon. If I'm having cheesecake, you're having cheese. You are eating everything that I eat. You are now raised to the status of one of my family members. David didn't have to do that. There's no who's gonna protest. There's one lone survivor left, and he's hiding out because he thinks David has it in for him. But David remembered that covenant. Every time he looked at his hand, he saw that purple scar that he made a point of keeping. You know, there was no way it was going to fade with time. And years down the road, he looks at that because Mephibosheth, when he was crippled, he was 5 years old. He's a grown man now. So it's been years, and he's looking at that scar, and he's like, I can't not fulfill my covenant. I can't not be a man of my word. So the last point I would say tonight, a man after God's own heart is a man who will go out of his way to fulfill a covenant, to fulfill a promise, to keep his word. So you're building a profile of a man after God's own heart. He's a man who's not afraid to be a nobody in the middle of nowhere, doing a nothing job with a good attitude. You've got a man who will search out and take full ownership of his covenant with God, who will minister to God, who will personalize his relationship with God. Then you've got a man who, because of that personal relationship with God, now he's displaying strength and he's doing exploits because of his covenant. That covenant gave him boldness. That covenant gave him strength. And that strength not only helped him out, but it saved an entire nation. And then you've got a man who not only that, he honors the people in authority. He honors the people that God's already honored by making them king, in spite of being wrongfully accused. You've got a man who will stop at nothing to honor, to walk in honor. Even when he's being wrongfully accused, he still walks in honor. And that set him up to go ahead and actually become king. And then you've got a man who honors his covenant, who will go out of his way to stand, there's a 10, who will go out of his way and stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, even if it means putting himself at risk. And lastly, number 11, you've got a guy who will go and stop at nothing to fulfill his word. So we're building a profile of a man of God. Well, how does that translate into 2025? How does it translate? If you say you're going to do something, I'm going to mow the lawn. Yes, I'm going to take out the trash. Yes, I'll come in early. Yes, I'll stay late. Whatever. You're a man of your word. Because your word, and this is not something that people talk about nowadays, because we've basically raised an entire culture, we've raised an entire subgroup of people called lawyers to get us out of our covenants, to get us out of our contracts, to figure out loopholes and ways that we don't have to honor our word. And that's, nothing could be more ungodly than not keeping your word. And so if you say, who can stay late? Yeah, I can stay late. Oh man, I'm really tired. you know I said I was going to stay late, but I'm going to go ahead and clock out. My shift's over. But that's not what you said. Or anything like that. Yeah, Dad, I'll mow the lawn. I'll mow the lawn today. Man, I'm really tired. Practice went extra long. And I know it's only going to take me 20 minutes to mow the front yard, but man, I'm just not feeling it. That's not what you said. That's not honoring. That's not honoring your word. That's not being a man of your word. Those are probably the most glaring. Or, like I said, you're at work, the boss says, you know, I need you to come to my office. I need to talk to you about something. Such and such was broken, or such and such was missing. I didn't have anything to do with that. Well, but so-and-so said you did. What do you do at that point? What do you do at that point? You're like, well, listen, if it needs to be fixed, I'll fix it. So, it's missing. I'll find you another one. It's not popular because the world is always telling you all you got to do is start scrolling. In fact, there's all these AI, because you know darn good and well they're not true. There's all these little AI stories of the time that so-and-so stole my work and karma got him. Or so-and-so fired me and didn't realize that I owned 51% of the stock. And so I walked into the boardroom and I let him have it and everybody's face turned white and now I own the company. The world will tell you that that's how you get successful. You stand up for yourself. You fight back. There's a time to defend yourself and there's a time to be a man of God and go, you know what? Well, here, they took off without paying. What's their tab? What's $25? Here. Now the restaurant's full. Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to get there? Are you going to go after them? No, I'm not going to go after them. Your check's paid. Your till's good. We're done here. We're done. I'm going. When you are willing to do that, God, that's one of the things that these are qualities that God saw in David when he said, I have found David, my servant, a man after my heart. So, anybody else got anything? I know everybody's super quiet. I know a lot of people are tired. A lot of people have had practice. A lot of people have had work. But do you see how this flips the script on what the world says you need to be and you need to do to be successful? Does that make sense? You see how it's a different. God's ways are almost always completely opposite of the world's ways of doing things. I mean, you look at the life of Jesus, and he, said, here I am, the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve. Well, that flips the script on its head right there. The world says, man, you work hard to get in a position where you can tell people what to do. You work hard to get in a position where people come to you and offer you things and pay homage to you and all these different things. And Jesus himself goes, that isn't how this works, guys. I didn't come for you to grovel. I didn't come for you to serve me. I came to serve you. And that's what David did. Even when he was being hunted down for no reason, he still honored that. He still gave honor to that office. He still gave honor to his covenant, to his word. He could have said, man, Jonathan, your dad is crazy. We're done. We're done. But he didn't do that. So, if nobody has anything else, then I guess I'd say we're probably good for tonight. There's more things we can do. There's a section about David that we'll probably cover next time. that isn't pretty. It isn't pretty. What do you do when you screw up? Because you will screw up. You will screw up. And that's not me speaking doubt and unbelief over you. You know, that's not me speaking doom and gloom. We're human. We're going to screw up. But the difference is, what do you do when that happens? And we'll cover that next time, because that's really important. That's part of being a man of God. But I wanted to hit the parts that made him who he is. So, got anything? Spencer, you good? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and close out with prayer. Father, we're thankful that you're showing us what you look for in a man of God. That you're showing us the things to look for, the things to give ourselves to, that gives us the status that you said of David, I have found my servant David, a man after my own heart. Father, that's our heart cry, is to be counted as a man after your heart. Not perfect, but a man who seeks after the things you seek after, who seeks after honor, who seeks after defense of others, who seeks after a personal covenant and relationship with you. Thank you for showing us these things, Father. We determine not to just be hearers, but we determine to be doers, to be committed to being the men of God that you want us to be. And in doing so, we lift up Jesus. And you said, Jesus, and if we lifted you up, you'd draw all men unto yourself. Thank you for counting us faithful to be here at this time, to be your men that you need in the earth at this time. And we give you glory and thanks in the name of Jesus. And we say amen.